Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? I swear. I stood there on the stand ready to tell my story. At least, that was the idea I had in my head. I am going to get to share my story, right? What happened to me? Wrong. As long as you're in a courtroom where you're asked to prove that what happened to you is true, you're not the main character. You're not the hero, you're just a chapter in his book. There are 5 main characters in the courtroom. The judge, who oversees the case. The defendant, him. The Crown prosecutor, whose job is to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant is guilty. Defense, whose job is to prove that the defendant is not guilty, and the witness. That was me, and my job was to tell the truth. Crown began asking me questions regarding the statements and allegations I made against the defendant. The more questions asked, the more fear, anxiety, and panic I could feel, swirling through my body like a tornado, ready to cause destruction. I wasn't aware I could ask for a break, so I kept going, despite the fact that I was increasingly getting pushed further outside my window of tolerance. The window that allows us to gauge where we are emotionally and how those emotions may be impacting our nervous system and our ability to regulate. My body language began to change. I could no longer make eye contact with the crowd. My head was tilted down as I was slowly picking off the light pink nail polish I painted my nails with that morning. Thankfully, there was an objection in the courtroom, and I was asked to leave. I stood outside the doors hoping someone would come, but there was no one. I chose to enter the preliminary hearing portion of trial alone because I figured that telling the truth was easy. For those who may be wondering, why would she choose to do this alone? Well, the defendant was my stepdad, and his support team was my mom. Shame and guilt, they coincide with one another. This felt like a secret I needed to keep, from my friends and from the rest of my family. I didn't realize how badly I needed support until I was standing alone. I was called back in. I took a deep breath and blinked away the tears starting to form in my eyes. Defense would make statements like, "You made this up. You manipulated everyone into thinking it was him. You convinced Talia to join in on this elaborate plan." Me and my younger sister Talia have always been the closest. However, separated by a system, we legally were not allowed to sit in on each other's testimonies. Let's take a step back for just a minute and look at what happened to me in this courtroom. It's important to do this because parts of my story are shared by many survivors. Our court system presumes the innocence of the accused. For survivors, that means that our stories are automatically doubted. The second I stepped into that courtroom, all the responsibility of having to convince an older, intimidating, more educated group of people, following a centuries-old system of law, fell on my shoulders. I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't have a support system to rely on, and as you'll continue to hear, it was very traumatic. Survivors have already suffered enough trauma. Telling their stories to the courts shouldn't add to that trauma. I was only 11 years old the first time this person chose to take advantage of the power and control he carried. Standing in that courtroom, inside that witness box, it wasn't an adult being questioned. It was that little 11-year-old girl who loved Hannah Montana and playing grounders in the park. Somehow that little girl was being convinced that her truth wasn't enough. How could someone make me feel like I failed at telling my truth? Before I could finish testifying, that swirling tornado touched down. I began to cry and couldn't catch my breath. I left the courtroom and fell to the ground. I laid there, on my side, with my knees tucked into my chest, with my face hidden by my hair. "Don't touch me, get away," is what I would repeat over and over again until eventually I just blacked out completely. Trauma response, the most significant one I have ever and hope to ever have. I'm telling you about one of the most difficult moments of my life because it is only through sharing these stories that we're able to counter the shame and fear that keep survivors silent. Survivors' lives are changed forever the moment an abuser chooses to violate them. For me, I chose to change my narrative through reporting. That makes me and my story incredibly unique because over 90% of sexual assault cases go unreported. Fast forward 1 year post-preliminary hearing, where we were told that enough evidence had been proven to grant us a trial. Cue anxiety. Just thinking of having to testify again would make me anxious. The thought of that trauma response would create a fear in me. I could not and would not walk into that courtroom alone. If you're ever looking for court support, search court support. It works. CASA came up first. Calgary Communities Against Sexual Abuse. I would muster up the courage to call them, explain my complex situation, provide them with a court date, and then magic. I was paired with my support worker less than 1 week after my initial call. I met Heather, my support in all things trial and feelings. This working relationship would mark the first time I ever truly felt validated and believed. She would create a safe place for me to search for strength and would teach me how sitting in the silence would give me an opportunity to find my voice again. Whatever anxiety I'd bring to her, we'd work through it together. She'd educate me on my rights and explain every relevant detail about trial. Each week, a little closer to trial, a little less anxiety with each session that would pass by. After many delays, we would walk back into that courtroom. But this time was different. This time, I would walk in with people who had my back. When I took the stand again, I proved to myself that I was capable and strong enough to transform my trauma into resilience and strength. This is what that looked like. I hugged a teddy bear, picked up a rock, closed my eyes, breathed in through my nose, counted to 5, exhaled, and when I was ready, I opened my eyes. Then and only then would I take the witness box. When I looked up, I saw Heather and my best friend Amy. My eyes locked with theirs, and every fear, every doubt became minimal, knowing that if I left that courtroom in tears, I'd have my girl gang ready to wipe them away. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? I swear. Crown began her questioning. Nailed it. Defense. Defense was my villain, but I was about to shock her with my strength. When defense began, so did the pounding in my heart. My hands became clammy and my body began to shiver as if I was freezing, when in reality, it felt like my body was on fire. I took a second to remember all the coping strategies I had worked on with Heather. I could hear her voice in my head. Close your eyes. Count to 5. Breathe in through your nose. Exhale. Feel your body relax. Where are your feet? Are they planted on the ground? Wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, and when you're ready, open them. I was safe. I had Heather and Amy right in front of me, ready to celebrate any accomplishment I would make during this process. When defense spoke, I knew the answers to all her questions, and this time, I made a point of making eye contact with her, a fear I was able to get through during my sessions with Heather. I wasn't going to let her stick me into a box of vulnerability. My strong response remained throughout the rest of cross-examination. I remember answering questions so well that it caused defense to fumble over her words and have to refer to her paperwork. Finally, I was released from the stand. What a mic drop that was. I smiled from ear to ear, jumping out of my body, twirling in circles like a little girl, because that's what I was when this all began, a little girl. I was so empowered and so proud at all the accomplishments I had made. I looked to Heather, wide-eyed and with the biggest smile. No trauma response. That right there was my victory, conquering my biggest fear, facing my biggest villain. We went through a 10-day trial with ups and downs, tears and laughter, and a lot of Taco Bell. It was messy, it was scary and unpredictable, but with a willingness to see this trial through, we made it. I understand that when hearing stories like mine, we want the outcome to be a guilty verdict. Less than 3% of sexual assault cases are found guilty, and unfortunately, we fell right into that statistic. Yes, the verdict was not guilty. Disappointed? Definitely. Overwhelmed and relieved? Of course. But the biggest feeling of all? Proud. My objective was not a guilty verdict. My objective was to prove to myself that I was capable and strong enough to transform my trauma into resilience and strength. I crushed that trial. I transformed every fear, every doubt, every anxiety, all that trauma into resilience and strength. My story changed when I found support. When I learned techniques and tools to get me through a court experience. When I was validated, listened to, and believed. But none of that would have happened if I hadn't taken the steps to make it happen. None of that would have happened if I hadn't advocated for myself. So, where do we go from here? Your journey and your story will look different than mine. However, as survivors, we will always have one thing in common. No matter what anyone says or thinks, you're the hero. Now all you have to do is find your sidekicks. They'll have your back and they'll empower you through it all. This is your story. You decide how it ends. Not a system or a piece of paper, not a judge or a defense lawyer. And when it comes to that villain, whoever or whatever it is, you got this. Close your eyes, and when you open them, get ready to conquer. I was told by someone I admire, Rupa, to always tell my truth, to use my voice because it is loud, fierce, and powerful. With her inspiration, I now pass this advice along to you. Be brave, be bold, and be loud. Just don't be silenced.